Welcome to the Brodart Tell Me More Fantasy Webinar. Today, 5 authors will be sharing their stories with you. Our moderator, there we go, Susie Howley. She's our collection development librarian at Brodart. Susie Howley has been a school media specialist, a professor of children's literature, a Newbery Committee member, and co-author of a children's literature textbook. She has over 20 years in collection development with Brodart, specializing primarily in children's and young adult materials and titles. Over to you, Susie.
Hi, everyone. We're so happy you're here. Thank you for joining us today. As Elenita said, we have 5 wonderful authors. Each will tell us about the newest book, their or her newest book of fantasy. We'll be hearing first from Lauren Magaziner, and she'll tell us about her book, The Incorruptibles. Lauren grew up in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and now lives in Philadelphia. She received degrees in creative writing and philosophy at Hamilton College and spent a year in Edinburgh, Scotland, where she wrote her debut book. While in Scotland, she also herded sheep, witnessed a waddling parade of penguins, spotted the Loch Ness monster, attended a royal wedding, and stuck her face in a fairy river of eternal youth. When she returned to the States, she spent a couple of years working for Scholastic, where many of her colleagues thought she made up her last name, which you may remember is Magaziner. Go ahead, please, Lauren.
Oh, hi everyone. I'm Lauren Magaziner. I'm the author of The Incorruptibles, which is an upper middle grade fantasy for ages 10 to 14. It's a series starter that comes out on June 10th, and I am so excited to share it with you. So I wanted to tell you about the origin of this idea. It all really started when I was a kid. I devoured fantasy, could not get enough of fantasy books, TV shows, movies, and they all kind of followed this pattern of there's a kid and they find out that they're powerful, special, talented, chosen ones, and they're told that they're meant for greatness and sent on a journey, oftentimes, sent somewhere where they learn how to get better at their powers and get stronger. And I always wondered, how did these characters not let that go to their heads? The fact that they were the chosen ones, the special ones, so much more powerful and better than everybody else. I just, especially as they got stronger and more adept at their magic, it just really was always in the back of my mind, like, how are these people not so inflated in their own egos? And so that's what I did. I started writing about sorcerers that did have these inflated egos, and let it go to their heads. So in the magic system of the Incorruptibles, basically anyone can become a sorcerer, but to do so is basically seen as a moral failing. It's basically like telling everyone else that you are power hungry, because magic is a tool for oppression in this world. And they use it against people who don't have any magic at all. So this isn't a portal fantasy, and it's not a new world. It's actually a dystopian fantasy version of our world. So about 100 years before the events in this book, our world was kind of operating as normal, and then people figured out how to turn their bodies into weapons using via magic. And then everything went awry. So the first thing that people did once they discovered they could become sorcerers was they conquered every town and every city that you've ever heard of and renamed it after themselves. So all of the small towns and villages in the world are like, made for minor sorcerers, and all of the bigger cities are conquered by big sorcerers. And then the most powerful ones of all are called the Radiants, and they don't actually have any cities or towns. They just wander around, and they basically control all of the other sorcerers. So the main character, her name is Fiora, and she is not a sorcerer. She hates sorcerers because when she was 6 years old, a sorcerer killed her parents. So she lives with her uncle, who is a tailor, and she works as his apprentice. And she's heard rumors about sorcerer fighting people called incorruptibles, but she doesn't actually believe that they're real because she's never seen one, and it just seems really too impossible to fight sorcerers. They're just too powerful. but she actually has a run-in with the Radiance, the very, very strongest of the sorcerers, and she doesn't realize that she is having a skirmish with them until after the skirmish is over. She kind of mouths off to them and gets herself into a little bit of trouble and is saved by an incorruptible. And that's when she learns that these sorcerer fighters are real. And they have an academy where they train young sorcerers, or sorry, they train people to fight sorcerers, young kids to fight sorcerers and become incorruptibles when they grow up. So as she is whisked away to Ink Academy, she discovers that it's not actually a school as much as it is a brawler's boot camp. So there's a lot of sparring, there's a lot of obstacle courses, there's so much running, more running than she can handle. And they don't have any magic, so they have to fight magic with tech and with grit. And as you can see on the cover, here's they have some of the tech. So here's like the lightning blaster. This character has a wind sword. Back here, you see a force field shield. Over here are energy pulse gloves. There's like lots of technology that they have in the book that was just really fun for me to write. So the book has 21 squads, and there are 3 squads per class year. And each one has a different fighting style. There's a close range squad, a mid range squad, and a long range squad. And writing these squads was maybe my favorite part of the book. The squads are all named after flowers, which is really funny if you know me, because I cannot keep a plant alive to save my life. And I loved the squads. To me, it was really important that they felt like a found family, like really warm and really inclusive, just a supportive environment for kids. Something that I had wanted as a kid but never actually got was an epic ensemble fantasy series with queer representation that was casual, plentiful, and joyful. And so this is actually kind of like my ideal world. People are who they are and they love who they love, and there's no coming out necessary. It's just everything's met with warmth and support. And there's inclusivity of all types in this book, because it was really important to me that everybody felt safe and at home and like they belong at Ink Academy. So the series is about teamwork. It's about compassion, loving communities. It's about finding strength and empowerment when you are literally disempowered. And one of my blurbs had said that this book will inspire future heroes, which is honestly like the nicest thing anybody could say about this book. And I really hope that you feel that when you read it, that this will inspire future heroes.
And one of your reviewers, actually, Lauren, said that she is a kick butt heroine with no special powers. And I thought that was great, really. Yeah.
Yeah, it was important to me that Fiora, she's not actually like, she's not a chosen one. She's not special in any way. She's not even the most talented person at school. She's pretty middle of the pack when it comes to fighting ability. But she's got a lot of heart, and she really just all the grit and determination that she has, and a very strong moral compass as well.
Well, you said at one point that you're a cat person with the personality of a dog person. And I'm dying to know exactly what that means.
So I think that I just love cats. I'm obsessed with cats, but I have a like very outgoing, friendly, gregarious personality, and I'm like get easily excited about things. So I just feel like my personality meshes more like with dogs, even though I'm a cat person. Every cat that I have ever loved has been like, can you get away from me? It's like too much energy. Um, so yeah, the heart wants what it wants, though. I just love cats.
That's funny. That's right about our dogs anyway. Now tell me this. You've written so many books, and of course, this is your first upper middle grade fantasy. But do you write only one book at a time, or do you write more than one?
I work on like 4 or 5 books at a time, but like all in different stages. So so some of them are like closer to finish, some of them are like smack in the middle, some of them are toward the beginning. I can't work on one thing at once. I will go stir crazy.
Mm. Little hyperactivity here, I think, huh?
But
Wow, I don't know how you can do that, but I'm amazed, and you did a great job with this one. Now, next, we're going to hear from Julie Kagawa. No, Julie. I said it right yesterday. I said it wrong today.
It's
Say
Kagawa.
it.
That's okay.
Thanks.
Everyone says Kagawa.
She has many series, and she finally wrote one about the dragons that she loves. Firebird is book number 2 in the Storm Dragons series. Julie was born in Sacramento, California, where she said nothing really happened. So her family packed her up and they moved to Hawaii when she was 9. In Hawaii, there were large carnivorous insects, colonies of huge geckos, and frequent hurricanes. And it sounds like where I live in Florida. She spent much of her time in the ocean until she got chased out by a reef shark or a jellyfish or an eel. Early in her adult life, she paid rent by managing bookstores and training dogs. These people on this program are so amazing because they've done and do so many things, by the way. She now lives in Louisville, Kentucky with her husband, 2 obnoxious cats, and a pair of Australian shepherds. Okay, Julie, take it away and tell us all about Firebird.
Thanks, Susie. Hi, everybody. My name is Julie Kagawa. I am the author of several YA novels, and Storm Dragons is the first middle grade series that I have done. No, I'm sorry, the second middle grade series that I have done. Firebread is actually the second book in the series. The first book is called Lightningborn, and I'll pop it up right here. That is Lightningborn. And what happens in Lightningborn is Lightningborn takes place in a kingdom made up of floating islands. And the only way that you can travel between these floating islands, and one might ask, how do the islands float? Well, magic, of course. The only way one can travel between these islands is by skyship or on dragonback. But dragons are super rare, super expensive, and only the super rich can own dragons. So they are the property of the king or, the nobles. And Lightningborn tells the story of the princess who discovers that the world, her kingdom, is sinking into the islands are sinking. They're falling out of the sky. Something has gone amiss with the magic that's holding them aloft, and they are slowly sinking. So she embarks on a quest to try to find out why the islands are sinking and to try to save her kingdom. At the same time, on another island, the poorest of them all, a scrappy street rat named Remy finds a baby wild dragon. And baby wild dragons aren't supposed to exist. There are no wild dragons in the world anymore. They are all property of other people. But he finds this baby wild dragon. It just kind of falls into his lap. And he decides that even though he's not supposed to have a dragon, or boys aren't supposed to have dragons, he's going to raise it and he's going to care for it. And he names it Storm. And he comes to realize that there is a evil pirate mage that is after this dragon. The dragon escaped from this pirate mage, and now the pirate mage wants him back. And Remy and Jem, who's the princess, their paths collide when they both encounter this pirate mage. They have to join forces to save the dragons and eventually to try to figure out why their world is sinking and try to figure out how to save their world. So that is the premise of Lightningborn. Firebread picks up almost immediately after. Remy and Jem have joined a pirate crew, a pirate crew in an attempt to escape the evil pirate mage that is still after Storm. And they're trying to figure out why the islands are sinking and how to stop them. Their quest takes them to one of the last mythical true dragons in existence. You can kind of see him there on the cover. And the true dragons are legend. They're not supposed to. Supposedly they went extinct. But the true dragons are capable of intelligent thought, sentience, and casting magic. They were there when the world fell apart, in a cataclysmic event called the Shattering, when the world just kind of broke apart into the islands. They were there, and but nobody has seen them since. So they go to find this true dragon to ask why the world is falling and how they can save it. And the true dragon gives them the terrible, terrible truth about why the islands are sinking. I won't reveal it, um, but it does have something to do with the missing dragons. And the only way to save the island, to save their kingdoms, the only ones who know how, or who might know how, are the mythical elves. But the elves are supposedly extinct. They also disappeared with the shattering of the world. Or are they? So Remy, Jim, and their motley pirate crew of sky pirates have to go on an adventure, somehow find the elves, and ask them how they can save the islands. And it's a bunch of it's all the things I love in a fantasy story, like swashbuckling action. It's got magic. It has a scrappy orphan. It has a determined princess. And of course, it has all the dragons. So if you love magic and pirates and skyships and, magic again, princesses, and dragons, I think you're gonna love this series because I had such a good time. Had such a good time writing it. I love the characters. I love their interactions with each other. Storm is probably my favorite character. He's a sassy little dragon. He's a sassy little baby dragon that grows up into a sassy adolescent dragon. And him and Remy and Jem just kind of have a wonderful back and forth with each other. And I had a lot of fun writing the series, these two books, and I hope that you love it too.
Thanks, Julie. What actually, I know that you love dragons and have always loved dragons, but what actually finally inspired you to write this particular series about them?
Well, the world was actually inspired by a really old Disney movie called Treasure Planet. I don't know if anyone has ever seen that. It's basically Treasure Island in space,
Mhm.
but it had a pirate crew, a motley pirate crew. It had a scrappy orphan, and it had the sky. The thing that I loved about it was the sky ships. There were sky ships that sailed between floating islands in space, and it was just a really cool atmosphere and really cool visual that always stuck with me. I kind of always wanted to write a story that had sky ships, and if I got to combine it with dragons, that was even better.
I have one other question to ask you. I wondered, what did you actually pay attention when you were in math class?
No, not a bit.
And what did you do instead?
Um, so I had my math textbook and I had it open, and then there was like a book I was reading behind it through math class. So yeah, I would read during math class until my teachers discovered that little trick and then took the book away, and I'd be forced to pay attention for like that class session until the next day when I would bring another book, and eventually they just kind of gave up on me. So they let me read.
I asked you because I did exactly the same thing. And you know how it stopped? My
Mm.
teacher actually finally got so disgusted with me that he threw a piece of chalk and it went into the pocket of my shirt, and I had no idea. And the class suddenly burst into this uproarious laughter, and I still had no idea. So there I was, just looking around, trying to figure out what had happened.
Like I had no idea that he just chucked a piece of chalk at you.
No, it just slipped right down into my pocket. I had no idea. So when I read that you did that with your books too, I loved it because, yep, I know that one well. Thank you so much. And
Thank
now
you.
let's hear from Karina Finn, and we're going to hear about The Last Great Heir in the Feast and Famine series. It's her debut book for middle grade readers, which features the almost 13-year-old heirs to different ruling families and their impending duel, which will determine which one rules it all. She's another really fascinating person. By her own account, she's a food-obsessed writer, editor, network editor, and a content creator. She's written for Bon Appetit, Epicurious, Food Network, magazine, and others. Karina is Brooklyn born and Brooklyn based. She did leave long enough to receive her MFA in creative writing from the University of Notre Dame, and then she worked as a cook before finding her way back to New York. Her book is full of accounts of descriptions of absolutely delicious pastries. However, all of the pastries have one little detail that makes them not so quite so edible. A crusty dead beetle on the top, for example. Okay, Karina, tell us about your story.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so this is my debut book. I always like to start with a little fun fact about the cover, which is the cat here is a very powerful demon called the Centurion. And this character is actually inspired by my real cat, Alienor, who right after I sold this book, I was like, I'm finally going to buy myself a writing desk and a chair because I had always like written in bed or like hunched over a couch or something like that. And I got this lovely vintage upholstered chair and I had it for less than 2 hours before my cat clawed straight through the fabric. And I was like, you know what? You're getting written into this book as the villain. And I love my cat dearly. And I think it's so funny that she ended up on the cover and the artist had never seen her and she looks just like her. This book is full of talking cats, bookshelf demons. I live with a lot of books, and they're very important to me. And I think that books are magic and books can change lives. And so that's a really big piece of the story. Also, pastries. And as Susie mentioned, there are little details about the pastries that might seem less appetizing to us. And that's because resources in the land of Foret, where this story takes place, are very scarce. The reason that resources are scarce is because the Feast family has been in power for generations. Typically, the way the government works in this world, there are two families who've kind of been chosen as guardians of the land, the Feast family and the Famine family. And rather than having like an election or anything like that, the daughters of each family duel on their 13th birthdays every generation. And that's kind of like how power is decided. The Feast family is wildly popular because they love parties, they love pastries, they have this general, like very decadent, appealing lifestyle. But that lifestyle has put a real strain on the land, and only those who are loyal to the Feast family get to enjoy the spoils of the feast. So they have this big palatial complex by the sea called Eglantine. There are magical gates that you have to charm your way through if you want to kind of like get in with the feasts. And if you can't make your way behind those gates, you don't get to enjoy any of this. On the other hand, we have the Famine family. And even though they have not been in power for generations, their family is really dedicated to using their love of books, their knowledge of history, and their potion-making magic to ensure that the rest of the citizens of the realm don't starve under feast rule. The Famines are very wise, they're very kind, they're really dedicated to equality, but they're like basically allergic to fun. So even though their approach would help most people, their lack of popularity has been a huge challenge in terms of their heroes kind of like getting the sort of confidence boost that they need to perform really well in this duel. I started writing this book right around the time I started working professionally as a restaurant critic. So I was like constantly eating these luxurious meals. I was at restaurants up to like 5 times a day, depending on the assignment that I was working on. And so things like, caviar and Wagyu and like omakase, like that became like my version of peanut butter and jelly. And it was impossible for me not to think about how many people were like going without basic necessities, especially living in New York City, while I was living this like unthinkably lavish lifestyle. And so that was really like the seed that kind of brought me to these like opposing families and the idea behind the book. And around the same time, I was thinking a lot about the risks of surrounding yourself exclusively with people who think like you and who share your beliefs. This is a really big deal for Mary and Rue, who are the daughters of the Feast and Famine families. Both girls grew up completely sheltered and under an incredible amount of pressure to uphold their family legacies. They were each raised to believe that there is only one right way to live and that any opposing viewpoint is wrong. And I think it's fairly easy to see how the problems they face can kind of parallel issues that like we encounter in our world today. Rue's adventure begins when she sneaks out of her home, Wormwood Hall, this really like cozy, kind of like lightly gothic library manor. She sneaks out to try a pastry because she's never been allowed to have one. The Famine family, they don't really like eat. They take these potions and elixirs to give them energy. Mary's adventure starts when she finds a contraband famine potion book and starts trying to learn about the magic of her opponent. Both girls make this very brave choice to question everything that they've been told and learn to experience the world for themselves and form their own beliefs. And I think that's really at the heart of this book and at the heart of this series, which is currently planned to have 3 books in it. You get different character POVs in each section of the story, which I think is really fun to write because I love looking at the world from different angles, and this series has allowed me to do that. And I hope y'all like it.
Gosh, I have so many questions now about you being a restaurant critic. But we're talking books today. Another time you need to tell us all about that. Um, you actually have, how in the world did you? Well, first of all, had you been cooking your whole life and just found it absolutely entrancing and so forth when you were young?
I so I actually grew up pretty much exclusively eating like fast food and packaged food, like McDonald's, Burger King, like Little Debbie's oatmeal cream pies. Like
Wow.
I didn't really come to food as something that like I could be creative with until I was in graduate school getting my MFA. And I was living in Indiana, far away from everybody that I knew, and far away from like the restaurants that I was used to relying on. And so I had to teach myself how to cook while I was in grad school for writing. And I think the two processes became really like entwined for me. I studied poetry in grad school, and cooking to me always felt very similar to poetry in terms of like you're taking a structure, like a recipe, and you're putting different ingredients in it, just like you put language and metaphor and image into a poem. And then you get something like delicious to experience.
Very interesting. You know, when I first started reading the book, really on almost the first page, I think Rue is in hiding in a pastry shop. And she talks about this pastry that she sees. And when she explained it at first, I mean, I was honestly just drooling. And then when she did tell me, or when she tells us, she explains that there's a little delicious thing on the top, and they thought it was a delicious thing too. I was like, I don't know. Now, um, is there anything else that you would like to talk about how you were particularly inspired? You said by the way that you'd always liked the idea that people were trying to make the world a better place, and that these 2 girls actually so bravely went about doing it. And by the way, you did not mention that they were supposed to duel. Did you mention? I didn't remember you saying that.
I might not have, yes, they were supposed to fight each other, and neither of them really wanted to.
At age 13, that's the way they decide who's going to be the ruler. And they did not want to do that. And so they came up with this plan, which, was rather amazing, really. So good. That's
Yeah, I I always find it interesting that there's this trope in fantasy, and I think like most of us on here, I grew up on, things like Tolkien, like the Dark Crystal, like all of the Jim Henson kind of dark fantasy stuff. And so that was really like, Arthurian legends, like that was kind of like my bread and butter. And I think, and then, getting older, moving into YA, reading like the Hunger Games and all of that, you always end up in these situations where like the youngest people are the ones who are tasked with saving the world or like figuring out the problems for the adults. And I really wanted to create a world that showed how difficult that is, because a lot of times you get these characters who are just like, well, I'm chosen, like I have to go on this adventure, and they're kind of like Lauren, you were talking about, like they're kind of always cool with it. And I wanted to explore what it's like if the hero is like, I don't want to do that. Like I want to do something else.
Yeah, that was good. That was great. I mean, do you realize that all of these books have a lot of the same underlying message? That we need to really learn how to listen to other people, And still, we're talking about inclusivity and all of that. Every one of these books, as I was reading, I realized you're all saying the same thing and somewhat different ways, but all the same thing. Jordan, we're now ready to go on to you and your Queendom Come. And it is a climactic conclusion of your series, The Freeing Chronicles. In this one, her protagonist has actually won her position as a ruler in a previous title, and now she needs to save it. Jordan was born in New Zealand, raised in New Zealand and Canada. She now lives in Banff, Canada. She earned a bachelor's degree in English and one in the science of psychology and a master's of science in speech and language pathology. She spent the last 7 years working on the Freeing Chronicles. There are 3 books in the series. But she doesn't write every minute because she's also a yoga instructor and spends any other free time hiking, biking, and kayaking. And if any of you live near Banff, she's having a pre-release party for her book at the Banff Library on Saturday, March 8th, which is also the International Day of the Woman. Perfect timing. Okay, tell us about Queendom Come.
Oh, and it's such perfect timing. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Susie. And it's so lovely being here. Thank you so much for having me. Queendom Come is that climactic finale that we always love to see in young adult fantasies, where somehow we have the weight of the world on these late teen characters, and they're having to, as has been said before, kind of fight the battles of their predecessors, fight the evils of the world that was set up well before they were born. And because they have that idealism and that youthful vigor, they have maybe the optimistic, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed approach, but they have that I can do this spirit. So Queendom Come is the finale. We see this battle between rather good and evil. I liked the idea of having this battle between love and fear. My father once told me people only act out of 2 emotions. They either act out of love or they act out of fear. And it just kind of stuck with me that evil can be evil, but usually people are acting from a place of their best intentions. So when we act out of fear, we usually tend to do evil things. And that's where things like prejudice does come up. And the story really talks about how important it is to recognize the prejudices within our world and question them where possible, and hopefully to lead with kindness rather than that fear. So in the story so far, in Contest of Queens, we have Jax, an inventor's apprentice, and she's our main character, and Connor, who's secretly Prince Cornelius Freyan. So they live in 2 separate worlds, almost literally. Connor lives in the upper realm, which is where all the queendom, the upper echelons lives, and Jax lives in the lower realm, which is a sunken basin within the queendom where basically all the working class people live. So there's a cliff that divides these 2 realms. It is a very real manifestation of the class divide, and it is a matriarchal society. So Connor is in the upper realm, and he is feeling powerless because he is the only son and prince to the queen. So he has no real hope of being a leader. Jax lives in the lower realm where she doesn't have a voice in any of the big queendom decisions. And something very big happens. I won't tell you what, but there is a need for this contest of queens, which chooses the next ruler. So Jax starts to see all of this prejudice against her people in the lower realm kind of get to a boiling point where rather than her being the chosen one protagonist, I decided to have her be I choose myself because I see a need in this world and I'm going to be the voice that I know I need. So she figures out a way how to get up this impassable cliff, sneak into the contest, beat the contest, spoilers, and then at the end of the first book, we see her crowned in this very anticlimactic way because yes, she's crowned, but she still doesn't have the love of the upper realm because they discover she's from the lower realm. In our second book in the series, Queen's catacombs. And actually, I think it was Lauren who also lived in Scotland. I spent some time abroad and I got a lot of inspiration from the castles in the UK and also the catacombs in the UK and in Paris. And so a big chunk of the second novel is set in these catacombs between the queendoms. And it's kind of where the rot within the queendom is starting to be uncovered. So we have this shifting antagonist where in the first book we've got just general prejudice against Jax being her main opponent. In the second book, we have an institutionalized prejudice from the Council of Four, who are there and they're supposed to support the queen, support her rule. But because they don't agree with Jax's winning the contest, which they did try to rig, they start to be barriers to her success in trying to find that voice for her people. So in the second book, the antagonist is that institutionalized prejudice. And then in the third book, and that's Queendom Come, we're finally here. In that third book, that's where the rot is really revealed. We have this organization within the bowels of the queendom that is slowly altering the hearts and minds of its citizens and turning the people against their queen. We've got some magical elements in this series. We have griffins, we have scry crystals that project your image across the land, project your voice across the land. Griffins are kind of this deity, reverential creature that sit above the women, and they come to help, hopefully in a helpful way for our protagonists and not the antagonists. And fans of the selection, of the power, of Noughts and Crosses, of the Arcane series, which is on Netflix, of the Hunger Games are going to love this book. Fans of hot air balloons, griffins, girls with swords, and watching a powerful oppressor hopefully crumble. I don't want to give it away. Will be fans of this book as well.
I just want to ask you one question because I never really understood how, and I want to go back and read the other two books now, the prior books, but I never understood how Connor and Jax got together. They are in this book ready to marry, preparing to marry. But and it talked about their letters, but I didn't, I mean, I guess when she climbed the cliff, she must have met him then, perhaps.
So glad you asked this question, Susie, because it is one of my favorite things. I was a huge fan of the Swan Princess movie growing up, and I loved the idea of rather than two people meeting, falling in love at first sight, and getting married after 3 days, which is very Disney, and we love Disney for so many other reasons. But I love this idea of two childhood friends slowly growing together and then falling in love that way. And so how Jax and Connor meet is really the crashing of two worlds. So Connor he's kind of my Disney princess character. He's up in a tower. He doesn't really know how he can be powerful in his world. He sends a little toy boat with a message in a bottle over the cliff, kind of down a stream, down a waterfall, into the lower realm as kind of a greetings from the upper realm. I hope we can be friends, XO Connor. And then basically forgets about it. And Jax, as I mentioned before, she's the inventor's apprentice. So she's quite clever, quite resourceful. She's fishing one day and she finds this boat and kind of has this spark within her of, oh, I need to let my new friend know that I've received his letter. And so she starts working with the town's inventor, Master Leshy, on how to create a small hot air balloon, a candle-powered hot air balloon that can travel up the cliff and hopefully get received by Connor. And so over the years, she finesses her design and he keeps sending his boats down, and they have this correspondence that lasts a few years, all under the guise of she doesn't know he's the prince. And then yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but they do become friends. And then when she's up in the upper realm, because she doesn't know he's the prince, she meets the prince and starts falling for the prince, but isn't aware that he's also the reason why her heart is kind of connecting with him so beautifully is because he's secretly her childhood best friend.
Good. I'm so glad you told us about that. Okay. Now, Emma, we have you, Cousins in the Time of Magic, and it's Emma Ortegi. Is it time? I did that wrong, didn't I? Tell me, Emma.
It's Emma Otegi.
Thank you. It's a time travel about history, and it takes us back to 1862 and blends interesting stories about the Civil War and Cinco de Mayo. Emma graduated from Swarthmore College. She sold books at an independent bookstore and taught elementary school before she concentrated on her writing. She's a trained researcher with a PhD in history from NYU, which focuses on colonial Latin America. She has an avid interest in Latinx and U.S. history, which all readers will profit from. By the way, do any of you know the reason we celebrate Cinco de Mayo? Well, if not, you're going to find out today. And I was amazed at my lack of information. Thank you so much for all of this, Emma. And please tell us about your book.
Thanks, Susie. I've really enjoyed hearing everybody's presentations today. And this book, interestingly enough, also has not a hot air balloon, but a hydrogen balloon, and not catacombs, but abandoned aqueducts that the kids run around in. So some interesting connections to history and fantasy. So my name is Emma Otegi. I'm the author of Cousins in the Time of Magic, which was just released on Tuesday. Cousins in the Time of Magic is about three cousins in modern day Miami who get transported magically back in time to the 1860s, the time of the United States Civil War and Cinco de Mayo. And if you don't know what Cinco de Mayo actually celebrates, other than being a time for partying, like Susie promised, I'm going to tell you. So if you ask me why the 1860s, why the 1860s for middle grade readers, this is a short book. It is illustrated throughout. There are black and white illustrations by Polly Bernatene throughout the book. It is just under 200 pages, or actually, I think with illustrations, it's like 201 pages. But it is a quick, fast-paced read about big history that kids need to know. And the big questions in America, there were some big questions in America in the 1860s. And here I'm going to use the word America in the hemispheric sense of the word. So meaning not just the United States, but also the other countries in the Americas, including Latin America. So in the United States in the 1860s, a country lawyer born in a log cabin had just been elected president. In Mexico, another country lawyer, this one a brown-skinned Zapoteco, had also been elected president. And in France, a nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte was elected president. He staged a coup d'etat, declared himself monarch, and invaded Mexico. So the question of the 1860s became, what kind of place is America going to be? Is it going to be a place ruled by a handful of wealthy planters and a monarch? Or is it going to be a place of republics? And I encourage you to think of this as not two separate national histories, not the United States Civil War and Cinco de Mayo, but as one American history. The Confederates were actively seeking a European ally on their southern border. There were some Confederates, some members of the Confederacy, who wanted to find a European prince to install on the throne of the Confederate States of America. So really ick. And Napoleon III, for his part, was trying to help the Confederacy. He was having them ships built in his shipyards in France. And so when you understand this as one big American history, it makes perfect sense that when the Mexicans won, when the Mexicans defeated the French in the event we now call Cinco de Mayo, it was in the United States that people first celebrated because it was seen as a victory not just for Mexico as a nation, but for the idea of democracy. The idea that this country lawyer, be he brown or white, speak he English or Zapoteco, could be elected president, and the people in America could be ruled by laws, not by wealthy planters and a man who decided he was king. it makes perfect sense when we think of this as one history that as soon as word reached California that the Mexicans had won in the battle we now remember as Cinco de Mayo because it took place on the 5th of May, 1862. When word reached California, Latinos in the United States immediately began to organize to make a commemorative sword to send to Mexican General Ignacio Zaragoza. That sword never made it to Zaragoza. But that sword is where the adventure of cousins in the time of magic begins. These three cousins uncover the sword in their tia, in their aunt's yard in Miami. The sword leads them through a portal into this magical cove where they are able to get into a paper boat. That boat is inspired by Afro-Cuban poet Nicolás Guillen's poem that says, Por el mar del Caribe anda un barco de papel. In the Caribbean Sea, there is a paper boat. They get into this paper boat. They're transported back to the 1860s, where they dash behind Confederate lines. They rescue a Latino Union officer. They steal a hydrogen balloon that was actually being used by the Union Army. They fly the balloon to Mexico. They find the sword that they unfortunately lost in the middle of all of this. And they're able to get the sword to Mexican General Ignacio Zaragoza just in time to witness the Battle of Cinco de Mayo. So I tell kids that if they read this book, they're going to have a big adventure with a lot of magic and a lot of action, a lot of running away from bad guys, but they're also going to learn the history of American democracy. They're going to learn why we have celebrated Cinco de Mayo in this country continuously since the 1860s. And they're going to learn a history that tells us that we solve our problems when we work with our neighbors, meaning the countries in Latin America, and not against our neighbors. I think this is a history that kids need to learn now as much as ever. And that's the story of cousins in the time of magic.
Thank you. And of course, I realized what a researcher you are because when I was reading about General Magruder, who just has a really tiny part in this book, I spent a lot of time in Lexington, Virginia. Of course, there's a lot of talk of the Civil War there, and I'd heard all about him. And he who thought he was a prince, I mean, that's the way he acted. And
Yes.
he acted exactly that way in the little story you have about him in there. So I know.
I had a lot of fun researching some of these characters. Magruder, I mean, he was in the right place for the narrative I was trying to write because I was trying to write about what was happening on the East Coast in May of 1862. So it was convenient timing, but Magruder was also such a character
Yeah.
that he begged to be made into a children's book villain.
Oh, isn't that? Oh, that's great. That's a great way to say that. Quickly, I read that some of you really write in very interesting places, and we don't have a lot of time left, but I would love to hear where some of you write. Who is it that does anybody write at a cozy little coffee shop? There you go. Emma does, and Karina does. And tell us a little bit about where, oh, and you do too. Jordan, I guess, Julie, you might be the only one who doesn't.
You're looking at where I write.
Okay, I can see that. Yeah. Yeah. So do you move around? I find that when I'm writing, I just plant myself. I really don't move around. But somebody that I know well was telling me, in fact, yesterday, that she has to get up and move from place to place. Do any of you do that? Yeah.
I have three very little kids, and so I find that if I come back to my apartment after I drop them off in the morning, I'll just clean all day and feel really miserable about how I spent the time that I have. So I tend to try and go straight to a coffee shop and write before I do anything else.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. So then how long do you stay there?
An hour or two until A, it starts to be a little socially awkward that I've been there that long, and B, by that point, I usually want to move a little bit. And what I try to do is tell people that if somebody wants to hop on a call with me or something, I'll sort of say after 11 a.m. and that'll, so it's not long, but it's consistent.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Karina, were
find
you
that-
gonna? Okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Jordan.
I was gonna jump on what you said, Emma. I find coffee shops to be really motivating as well. I have a word count in mind of what I'm aiming for each day. And my rule is if I'm at a coffee shop, I have to have one active drink at all times. And maybe a treat, but it definitely has to have an active drink. And so the longer I stay, the more expensive it gets. And it's better to try and get, 2 coffees and then have your word count rather than on the third coffee, you're starting to see through walls.
A lot of caffeine.
Anybody else?
I write dangerously. So my favorite place to write is in my bed, on my back, with my computer on my stomach, which feels like
Wow.
it's begging for a nap, but somehow I don't nap. It's also terrible, I'm sure, for my posture and my wrists. So one day this will catch up with me, but for now, that's my favorite spot.
I once
Interesting.
heard that Astrid Lindgren did all her writing in bed, like
Yeah.
before she got out of bed. So maybe you'll get Pippi Longstocking out of it.
Hopefully.
Very interesting. Well, I don't have any more questions, Elenita, or would you guys like to ask some questions of each other? Because we've learned a lot of really, really fun and interesting things here. Anybody got any questions? Elenita, how about you?
No, I think this is great, very informative. I think our librarians are gonna love it. So I want to thank you all for presenting and writing these great books. And I want to thank your publishers for having you partner with us. And I want the audience to know that books are available through Broadart. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so much
having us.
joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah.